And now joining us here on In the Circle is, believe it or not, folks getting ready to head to Colorado. It's Colorado time in softball. Time flies. We're going to, of course, usually around this time, we go over some of the big coaching carousel moves as well as player movement, assistance to this point, but yet kind of a low-key but busy carousel. And who else we're going to have? The man who's competing with Adrian Wojciechowski for his Twitter space for breaking news and tweets. It's Woj and this man, Justin McLeod, joining us here on In the Circle.
That's quite the intro. That was really that was.
I mean, it's you and Woj. I mean, it's NBA draft week in the NBA with NBA free agency after that, right? Neck back to back. And, softball, we've got Colorado, which usually means the coaching carousel and player movement. I will begin to ask you about player movement. Obviously, the big story was Jordy Ball departure from Oklahoma to and head over to Nebraska. We're going to ask you about that. But a news that came out this week is Elena Vader from Stanford entering the transfer portal. You broke that story as a grad assistant. I want to ask you first about that and why. Don't jump to conclusions when it comes to Elena Vader. Let's first start with her.
Well, I think the main thing with her is she's a grad transfer, like you say, and that means she's got her Stanford degree. And it's a very different thing to leave Stanford pre-degree than it is to leave Stanford with at least one degree in hand. That's another thing, though, that plays into now that she's on the open market. What is she chasing? Because, I mean, Vader is incredibly smart and incredibly, what she's done for that Stanford program, she's still underrated. She was an All-American finally this year. She got to play at the World Series and be on that stage, and people saw how good she is. She's still underrated. But the kicker now is she can go one or a couple of directions, or she could go somewhere in the middle. She could go somewhere that furthers her career path, go for a master's. Her undergrad was in engineering. And so, I mean, she's incredibly smart, obviously. She could go for something that furthers her career path, whether that's in engineering, whether that's a specialty, whatever it is she aims to do. And so she could chase the degree and just end up playing ball wherever she goes. We've seen quite a few players leave high academic schools and go somewhere specifically for the master's program. But Vader could also, if she so chose, go somewhere just to play ball for a year. The world now has seen what hardcore softball folks and people like you and I have seen for several years, which is Elena Vader is pretty dang good. And so she also has the option and the opportunity to go somewhere just to play ball for a year, whether that means getting some kind of placeholder diploma or certificate or whatever before going after a master's, whatever that might mean. That is an option on the table for her now. Or she could go somewhere in the middle and find a school that, perfect match of a master's program and softball. So she's got some different options on the table, but you can't take Vader because of how intelligent she is coming off of Stanford. She's not just your stereotypical high dollar, big name transfer. She's got some different things going for her and working for her in this process.
It's worth noting that all this conversation is as of recording Tuesday night. So I want to make a note of that. Tuesday night, we're recording this because Justin's going to be traveling to get his way to Colorado, and things may happen. News may come out that, during that time. So this is as of Tuesday night, all this information that we're having. Now, Jordy Ball. We spent the last two episodes on Jordy Ball. Spoke to Eric Bailey of the Tulsa World, representing the Oklahoma side. We had Nate Rohr, the voice of Nebraska, talk about their perspective in our last two episodes. So we're not going to spend too much time on Jordy Ball because we've done that in the last two episodes. But I do want to ask you, since this is the first time publicly, your thoughts on Jordy Ball now that you've had time here since the news came out about a week ago or so. Jordy Ball to Nebraska, your thoughts?
Well, I think that's something where I was less surprised that she was leaving Oklahoma and going to Nebraska. I was more surprised that she actually pulled the trigger. I understand the homesickness. I understand whether you call it pressure or whatever it is at Oklahoma and getting to her. I was surprised she pulled the trigger. But at the same time, I think it's an incredibly impressive step to me It's hard to be at the top of the mountain. And for anybody, not just Jordy Ball, for anybody, it's hard to be at the top of the mountain and make the conscious choice, hey, let me go down a few steps. Let me get off the top of the mountain and go down a few steps, and then let me bring somebody else or somebody's else up with me back to the top. And honestly, that's what Ball is doing. She's leaving Oklahoma. She's one of the best talents, the best players in the game, leaving the best team to go to another team that has other things going for it besides being the best team. Nebraska's not the best team, but they're her hometown team. They're the team that she was committed to originally. They're the team that she, the program, athletic program that she probably grew up loving. So there's extra pieces there, and that's an incredibly brave step for somebody to do that. Now, are there other things in play? Potentially, sure. Ball is going to be the most well-known athlete in college in the state of Nebraska, in all likelihood. She's going to be a better known name than probably most of Nebraska's football players, maybe than some of Nebraska's coaches, even, just because that's the star power she carries with her, transcending softball. I was surprised she pulled the trigger. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, no matter how homesick somebody gets. But I mean, it's got a cascading effect for Nebraska. Like you mentioned, you've had both sides of the issue. Somebody from Oklahoma, somebody from Nebraska talk about it. It's got cascading effects for Nebraska. It's got cascading effects for the Big Ten, for Oklahoma. There's a lot of effects across the board that affect a lot of people, but none more than Ball. And I'm impressed she knew what she wanted to do and did it.
As of today, do you make Nebraska the Big Ten favorite?
Yeah, I think that's easy. I don't think anybody in the Big Ten as of now can really touch Ball. And even 6 months down the road in February, I don't see who or what is going to change that might change that, honestly.
All right, that's enough Jordy Ball. We've had a lot of Jordy Ball talk. Let's talk about some other portal moves. What other moves has stood out to you to this point? A player that has moved on and gone officially to another school that's not named Jordy Ball that you think will have the biggest impact in 2024?
Well, to me, it has to be Bree Ellis to start. Going from Auburn, she was the SEC Freshman of the Year in 22, to go from Auburn to go into the portal as such a big name, and then to stay in conference, go to Arkansas, and get ready to be part of the anchor of that lineup there in Fayetteville. Like, that's a huge move on a lot of fronts. Obviously, her leaving Auburn was a big deal. Her going to Arkansas is a big deal. Her staying in the SEC is a big deal. There were quite a few people who expected Ellis to go to an Oklahoma, for instance, just be the latest, great addition to the Oklahoma lineup. And instead, she goes to Arkansas. I think it immediately adds obviously it adds depth to Arkansas's lineup, but I think it immediately adds an extra piece of legitimacy to that lineup, because you got to think 2 years ago, we saw what the Arkansas lineup was. This past year, not so great. Then coming into 2024, right now, let's put it this way. Arkansas has Bree Ellis and Kylie Halverson, who can both play first base. Is it likely one DPs and one plays first? Sure. But right now, Arkansas is back to having two of the best first basemen in the game in their lineup. And that's a good problem to have. Arkansas is back to having too many hitters for too few positions. That's a good problem to have. So to me, once you get past Jordy Ball, Bree Ellis is next on the list of individual players who are going to have a really humongous impact at their new schools.
That is a big move. And a reminder, depending when you're listening to this, it is going to be next week is the final week before the portal closes in softball. So it'll be a week from this Wednesday. It'll be June 28th, I believe is our last day. Correct, Justin?
That's right.
Do you expect a flurry of players to enter the portal between now and then? Do you think it'll be like, what do you expect? What's the word around this? Because you've been talking to people, you've been traveling through travel ball circuits. What's the word? Do you think that there's going to be a big flurry of names that pop in at the last minute before it closes? Or do you think it's going to be pretty much what we've kind of had this offseason, which is not, I think it's been, I don't know what the proper word would be. It's not been crazy. It's not been wild. It's been, yes, there's a lot of names, but not not like in past years.
I do think there will still be some traction and some traffic in the portal. I do think we'll see yet a few more names by the time somebody's listening to this. Some of those names may be in there. I do think there will be some more names before the portal window closes, before the deadline of the 28th. I think too you'll have some players who maybe have been toying with it, who go in maybe to test the waters. Maybe to see, I've been thinking about it. I'm going to go in and see, because after the 28th, it's a very different picture. So because of this portal window, and this is the first year the portal window has been used in softball, that changes it a little bit, because it's not, oh, well, you know what? Season's over. I'm not sure if I want to go in. Or, hey, I've got a new coach. We'll see how it works out. If somebody wants to go in, it's not, hey, I can wait until August 1st and school starts August 2nd. The window changes the timeline. So I do think we'll see some talent still go in. I think we'll see some skill players still go in. I think we'll still see some difference-making players go in. But I think we'll also see some who go in maybe to test the waters. Maybe somebody who, isn't even necessarily planning on leaving their current school, but maybe they're just not in the happiest position. And maybe the coach says, hey, see what you're made of. Anything is possible, but I do think we've still got some traffic still to go before that portal window closes for sure.
Well, especially with some new coaching changes going on, which is a good segue to the coaching moves, which, Justin, I don't know whether it speaks to it or not. Now, and I think there's two parts to this coaching carousel. I think we're in phase one, if you will. I think phase two is still to come, which we'll get into with the addition of a third full-time assistant coach, full-time fourth paid coach, depending on how you want to define it. We'll get to that a little bit. But the fact that we opened talking about players in the portal more so than coaching carousel kind of tells, I think it's been kind of a quiet coaching carousel compared to past years. There's been some jobs which we'll break down here momentarily. But how would you describe so far the 2023 coaching carousel in college softball?
I've used the word wacky quite a bit. That's about the best word I can come up with. I think it's one of those things, every year there's something different about the carousel. And to me, what's funny this year is the jobs that have come open. Oh, actually, let me back up. One thing that was going to be key coming into the summer was it was a contract year for a lot of coaches. Power 5 coaches, mid-major coaches, it was a contract year. Contracts were running out. Coaches, and that's key because there's no buyout. If the contract runs out and the coach is non-renewed, school doesn't pay a dime. They fulfilled their commitment. And there was a lot of coaches whose contracts were running out. So it was decision time in a lot of places. And to me, that was going to be key from day one, because a lot of those coaches whose contracts were running out were almost in make or break years, where maybe the program had been good for a year or two somewhere in there, but maybe hadn't been great the last several years, maybe was backsliding for whatever reason. This was a key year. And we've seen some of those coaches go and either quit, be fired, whatever it is. But we've also seen quite a few coaches sign contract extensions. So it kind of starts off as a wacky summer, because what could be a huge pool gets narrowed down shortly after the season, because contract extensions, some places, this year was really good for a team. Some places an athletic department bought into the progress of program and made. Some places they signed them to a contract extension, maybe from a premonition from heaven. I don't know. But the jobs that have opened, you talking about, you got 3 jobs in the ACC. You got a job in the Big Ten. But in general, big Power 5 wise, you don't have a lot of openings. And then some of the openings that you have at smaller market or mid-major, or whatever word you want to use, programs, it gets interesting, because you think about some jobs, and I'm sure we'll talk about some specifically, but I'll use UTSA just as my example here. That's a school going into the American Conference. So it's a school in a good conference, in a good location in San Antonio. You've got a lot of Texas potential, but UTSA has not been a good program. So a lot of the jobs that are open are somewhere in that middle range of either they're in a good position program-wise, in terms of maybe they've won some games, maybe they've won a conference championship here and there, but maybe the stature of the program's not there, or for some, the stature is there, maybe the program's not great. So wacky is the best word I can come up with.
Well, UTSA is people have questioned the financial commitment to that school has towards softball, even other sports. There's some facility questions there. That's an interesting job to mention because they're making the jump to the American. And how much do you think realignment is affecting the coaching movement a little bit? And in like that's an example right there where maybe that job a couple years ago is not as attractive as it is now because it's going to the American as an example. Or the fact that there's so much movement in conference realignment that some coaches maybe are comfortable or where they're at now. How do you think? Is there any impact realignment's having? You think?
I think there is to an extent, both somewhat directly and somewhat indirectly. Like you mentioned, UTSA, if that school is willing to commit to the softball program because they're going to the American, or they're willing to, focus certain priorities because they're going to the American, then yeah, I would say that's a direct impact on their program. If not, if they continue being a low paying and they're willing to be the bottom rung of the ladder in a new conference, then I'm going to say, realignment really doesn't matter because they were doing that in Conference USA already. The more indirect impact that I think actually is kind of directly on the carousel this year is just the continued uncertainty in some ways within college athletics, because whether it's an extension, whether it's the factors for decision making on how you hire or what you pay or the commitment to your program or anything like that, I think just the general uncertainty of college athletics, whether that's realignment, continuing realignment, the financial implications of realignment, those aspects of it, I do think that's got a direct impact on this year's carousel and some of the things that I said fell under that wacky description.
All right, let's get to some of the moves that have been made. I think Tobacco Road, obviously, to me so far is kind of the defining area, if you will, of coaching moves. Both North Carolina and North Carolina State with openings. North Carolina with the retirement of Donna Papa. NC State, obviously, that job had been open since March. Both have made moves.
Yep.
A significant move. Let's start with North Carolina, the more recent one of the two. That was a big speculation one after Coach Pop. I don't think anybody was shocked that she retired. There were some people wondering if this could be it for Coach Pop or not from a retirement standpoint. The speculation began. I think a lot of people thought this job could probably stay within the family. Kind of like if you want anybody that follows North Carolina, in a lot of their sports, they tend to keep it in the family. In other words, people that have ties to the university that maybe were an alum. Case in point, their volleyball coach from a long time retired. They promoted the volleyball coach, the assistant who's been there a long time, etc. Men's basketball's done this for many years, most recently with Hubert Davis being promoted. I bring all that up because Megan Smith Lyon gets the head coaching job at North Carolina, Tar Heel alum. Obviously coming over from Marshall. Interesting little weird note. She joins Roy Williams as coaches in softball and men's basketball that have coached both at Kansas and North Carolina, by the way. There you go. Making a vote there. I only bring that up because she's a diehard Tar when I've talked to her in the past about that. Your thoughts on Megan Smith Lyon? You reported on Twitter. Where's your Twitter again, Justin?
My Twitter at Just Facts Now?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That's pitching fun. You mentioned, obviously, that Corey Lyon will be coming along. No surprise, the hitting coach will be coming along with her. And that you expect her pitching coach to come. But basically, her entire staff from Marshall will be coming to North Carolina. So just kind of expand on that whole movement up there in Chapel Hill.
I think it was a package deal, first of all, with the assistants all along. I think it was you're hiring Megan Smith Lyon, you're hiring the staff. In terms of the move in general, it absolutely was keeping it in the family. Megan Smith Lyon's had some success. She had a couple of good years as head coach at Kansas. Obviously was successful in a couple of years as the inaugural head coach at Western Carolina. And had some good years at Marshall. Marshall fans and I had our discussions on Twitter this year about a high win total versus a very low strength of schedule. But at the end of the day, Megan Smith Lyon, she won a lot of games at Marshall this year, had a successful tenure there with the Herd. And in terms of the move, she was one that I had on the candidate list all along. She was one that I felt like was one of the better candidates. And also in part because she was in the family. She was what I thought was probably the best program alum to take over. I did not and still don't think she was the best candidate for the job. But when it comes to keeping into the family, she was definitely high on that list. just based on her experience and things like that. What does it mean for North Carolina? I don't know. I think North Carolina is still going to have to work to get to a point of relevancy in the ACC. I don't think it's a shoe-in that all of a sudden North Carolina is going to be a contender for the ACC championship. Megan Smith Lyon very clearly has a passion for the Tar Heels and the Tar Heel program. That will make a difference. Donna Papa had a passion for it, but Smith's just kind of a passion with a new voice, I guess you might say. So she kind of continues that passion for the program, part of the reason they want to keep it in the family. But she just kind of brings a new voice, some new thoughts. She's been around a little more. She's coaching some different places. Probably has some varied and different recruiting ties as well. Who knows what that'll lead to. One thing that's interesting is that Marshall, Megan Smith and her staff they got some solid transfers in. And that's not something that North Carolina has really done a lot of over the last several years. If you look at some of the talent that Marshall brought in, I think of Autumn Owen, I think of Sydney Nestor, who both played a considerable role in this successful season that was 2023. But also, I mean, Nestor was the Conference USA Pitcher of the Year in 22. So those players came in and were able to make a sustained impact on the Marshall program coming in as transfers. Autumn Owen obviously is now in the portal, seems likely to follow Smith and company to North Carolina. We'll see if that happens as of Tuesday night. As the usual disclaimer, it has not happened yet. But the fact that that Megan Smith and her staff at Marshall had such success with transfers is something that I think could be interesting at Chapel Hill, just because you haven't seen that a ton there. But in general, I mean, it does bring just a renewed energy to the program. I mean, I think maybe from the athletic department standpoint, maybe a little too tunnel vision in what they wanted. I would have liked to see a search that maybe ended with a few coaches all on the merits. I'm not a huge fan of the keep it in the family thing, but if you're going to keep it in the family, I think Megan Smith Lyon's probably your best choice.
See how she does. She's already been on ACC Network real quick. They interviewed her on some of the programming there. That'll be certainly the advantage. I think she probably maxed out what she could do in Marshall. They got to the championship game of the Sun Belt. Talking to people at Marshall, some of the alums, I think the push there, with at least from some of the alumni of Marshall, is perhaps Morgan Zirkle, the former Thundering Herd, who's an assistant at Miami of Ohio. Maybe is certainly a name to watch for that Marshall job. We'll see if that's a direction that they go. Wouldn't that be ironic if they go with their own alum and try to bring it into the family over there at Marshall, which is in the Sun Belt, which you think, again, here's another example. I think Marshall being in the Sun Belt, which is a strong softball league, multi-bid league this past year, do you think that enhances that Marshall job then supposedly when it was in CUSA, as an example?
I do think it adds an extra element to it. The Sun Belt is a strong softball league. It's also just a strong sports league for a mid-major. For a non-Power 5, the Sun Belt does have some strength. You think about the fact that they were one of the first mid-major leagues or non-Power 5 leagues or whatever wording you want to use to, for instance, institute instant replay in baseball and softball this past year when it became legal to do. They did that. You think about them proactively adding the James Madisons and the Marshalls and the Southern Misses, and I believe it's Old Dominion. They don't play softball, so I rarely think about them. But you think about the realignment that the Sun Belt has done, and I do think the fact that Marshall's in the Sun Belt does make a difference there. I think it should make a difference in how they approach their hiring process. We'll see if that actually happens or not.
There you go. Let's go over to Raleigh. NC State. This was a job they had all year to figure it out. They go with Lindsay Leftwich, longtime assistant at LSU, longtime assistant under Beth Torina. I mean, that is going to be strange this season when you watch LSU and Lindsay Leftwich is nowhere near Beth Torina. I mean, I've known Beth Torina since Lindsay has been with Beth since at FIU days when Beth was the head coach at FIU. So that will be unique in itself. Your reaction, I think that's why some people perhaps caught off guard that she got the job, just because people wondered if she would ever leave a Coach Torina staff. She obviously did. She's been rumored for jobs over the years. Why do you think this was the right time for her to become a head coach, and what's your thoughts of her fit at NC State?
Well, and I was one who was initially surprised by that hire. I think it was just kind of, it seemed a little out of left field. But when you stop and think about it, Leftwich checks a lot of boxes that the last couple of NC State coaches did not. She's a big name. She's well known in all circles, certainly recruiting circles and coaching circles, etc. Check. That box is checked. Leftwich is very well known. She's well liked. And that's something you can't take for granted. Leftwich is on the NFCA board as an assistant coach rep. Obviously, that'll change now. But she, amongst her peers, she's very well liked. She also has extensive Power 5 experience. Granted, it's at LSU and only at LSU in the Power 5, but LSU for more than a decade is nothing to roll your eyes at. Like that's a very deep Power 5 resume. She's been in the SEC all that time, knows how stuff is run in the SEC and the Power 5. So she checks that box, which the last couple of coaches at NC State did not. So even though the hire was a bit surprising just in terms of, like you say, Leftwich leaving LSU, I think she does check some boxes that I think it was important for NC State to check. And I think the only major one that I don't see her checking is having an existing deep relationship in the North Carolina circles, roots there. But I also think that is remedied by the fact that she's got deep roots in a lot of recruiting circles. And that's what she's exceptional at, is those relationships and building those ties. So I think when you look at Leftwich checking the boxes that she does, I think that box of the recruiting relationships and those roots in the North Carolina recruiting circles that's going to be a box that's checked at some point. So in that respect, I like the hire. It is going to be weird to not see Leftwich at first base, or not see her in the coach's huddle at LSU after so long, not see her right next to Beth Torina after so many years. I believe it's 17 years between FIU and LSU combined. But I think it was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. Whether that's, just the package that NC State offered, whether it was where NC State is, whether it was the fact that they were in a position of being a program willing to make a larger commitment to the program than in the past, whatever the X factor was, I just think it was a good time. And I think actually Leftwich could prove to be a solid hire there.
You mentioned big name, big hire. That was certainly, we heard about that. NC State was shooting for a big name. We heard Pittsburgh, which we'll get into, was going for a big name. What do you make of that both NC State and Pittsburgh were going for big names? And the fact there was 3 jobs open in the ACC, how much of that was influenced? I mean, some of it's coincidental stuff, obviously Donna Papa retiring and all that, get that. But still, the fact that these schools are going big here, the fact, how much of that is because of the success Clemson and Duke have both had in such a short period of time, the interest in softball in the ACC. What do you make of those Pittsburgh and NC State saying, after years of people wondering, they don't really, spend too much money in ACC, but from what, I've gathered, and, I think you've heard similar things, NC State and Pittsburgh, this went big here. They went big trying to push the softball.
They did, and I think you've hit on what I see as one of the 2 reasons why, which is the growth of softball, especially in the ACC with Clemson and Duke, but also Virginia Tech kind of building and becoming a consistent contender. But the other half of it is part of the reason I think those schools prioritized at least going after big names as head coaching candidates is because what better way to try to sell your program without actually having to put finances and resources into it. You bring in a big name like a Lindsay Leftwich. Well, Lindsay Leftwich is going to put in the legwork. She's in those recruiting circles. You're going to be able to get talent because NC State got Leftwich, not because NC State is suddenly putting a ton of money into that aspect of the program. So if you hire a big name who's been in those big circles, who's well-known, who's successful, it almost can serve as a smokescreen for some of these schools. And I think that's one thing we've seen a few times over the years is you hire somebody who's accomplished, you hire somebody who's a big name, you hire somebody who's got a good resume, that's a good coach. If they're great, but you're selling that coach. You're not, you can promise the coach a new facility or whatever, but I do think there's a little bit of laziness on some schools' parts. And then 2, to be fair, there's also the aspect of what better way to try to join the haves, to go from being a have-not to something of a have, other than to get somebody whose name recognition immediately vaults you higher. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. With laziness is a word. There's several others, but that's kind of what I'm getting at is when you bring in a big name coach.
Complacent.
Yes, that's another word. Like, that's the thing. When you bring in a big name coach, you don't have to put money into it to vault to the top. You don't have to build the program financially or build a new stadium, whatever. You bring in a big name coach, you bring in somebody who's been at LSU for 12 years or whatever else, and you immediately go from potentially being a have-not to being something of a have without ever playing a game.
Right. Send a message to you're relevant now in softball, and you're not being complacent.
And it's not a knock on those coaches either. It's a credit to those coaches because obviously the schools believe in them and what they do and know that they're going to vault them up. I just don't think it's necessarily all kosher on the school's part all the time.
Well, what's interesting about Pittsburgh, they go with longtime Harvard head coach Jenny Allard. Still strange to say for me and a lot of people. A lot of people are caught off guard by this one, Justin. I don't think a lot of people ever thought Jenny Allard would be looking to move from Harvard. I mean, she's been there forever. Why do you think she decided to move on and that Pittsburgh was the right move? An interesting move. And I think a lot of people are intrigued to see how Jenny will adapt to life in the Power Five and how that fit will go.
No, absolutely. It was surprising. I think, when you see somebody spend almost 3 decades at a school, you don't expect him to leave. I mean, maybe you expect him to leave for an alma mater. I think of Bridget Orchard leaving Fordham for Villanova, was there almost 2 decades, goes home to the alma mater to rebuild it. Something like that makes sense. But you take Jenny Allard at Harvard and, it's an Ivy League school. She's won championships. She's won a lot of games. She was inducted into the NFCA Hall of Fame last year. It's just not somebody you normally see making a move like that. It caught me by surprise too. Allard was a candidate for the Pitt position 5 years ago, ultimately passed on at the time. But I think the situation now is a little different too, because you got to remember in the Ivy League, they've been through COVID. They've been through a second season completely canceled because of COVID. And then they've had players who never played a game until they were juniors. You've also got other things like budget cuts and staff and all that kind of things that change year to year, certainly changed within the last 5 years. And, to a certain extent, I have to have an appreciation for Jenny Allard for being willing to, take a new challenge almost 3 decades into her coaching career. Like that, or her head coaching career, I should say. Like that's not a small thing. And obviously there's the connection with Pitt's athletic director, Heather Lyke. They both go back to the Michigan days together. So that familiarity certainly plays a role. It certainly is a positive thing if you're Jenny Allard and making that move job to job. But definitely something that catches you off guard. You don't see a lot of coaches, honestly, leave the Ivy League for moves up the ladder. You don't normally see athletic departments go to the Ivy League in search of a coach. But let's be honest. Jenny Allard's been successful at Harvard. She's made several tournament appearances, won several Ivy League championships. I think the biggest thing now is just going to be how quickly she's able to adapt to the recruiting and the grind of the Power Five. And I mean, Jenny Allard's intelligent. I'm not just saying that because she spent 3 decades at Harvard. She is intelligent. So I think it's an informed move. So if she thinks she can do it, more power to her.
Well, I think it's going to be big because if she has success at Pittsburgh, that could make other Ivy League head coaches, perhaps that could become something that a lot of schools look at. Hey, why don't we look into Ivy League head coaches, and try to pluck them away if she has success. I think this is one that if she has success can register and make an impact down the road. But there's also the question of, can you win at Pittsburgh in the ACC in softball? I think that's a very interesting one. Well, speaking of interesting, now we got Purdue. Big Ten, who parted ways with Coach Boo, a longtime head coach there. According to many people, did a search firm, hired a search firm, did a coaching search. I was told by somebody that they wanted to keep it top secret because they didn't want, quote, people in softball to break stories to leak it. I don't know who they're targeting on that. Justin?
Me either. I have no clue.
Well, they were right. They got you, Justin. You didn't get to break this one because nobody saw this one coming. They ended up promoting their number 2 assistant, not number 1, because Dorian Shaw was also parted ways. So what's the story here? What happened here?
Let's just fuel with a little Dr. Pepper. Okay, so if you want a case of how to show you don't care about your softball program and spend a lot of money doing it, enter Purdue. And to be clear, this is nothing against the now head coach of the Purdue softball program. I don't know her. I believe I had one conversation with her. She seemed like a nice person. She's clearly a hard worker. I saw her on the recruiting trail literally the day this was announced. Nothing against her. Period. That said, now let's talk about Purdue, the athletic department. So there's a lot of things I can say here. There's a lot of words I can use, some of which are not suitable for a podcast. At the end of the day, I don't know that I have ever seen a Power 5 program try to draw such veils over absolute chicanery. I don't know that I have ever seen a Power 5 softball program be this discombobulated, a Power 5 athletic department show this level of no care for their softball program, and yet try to make it seem like the exact opposite. The only thing I'll say for other Power 5 programs that don't care about their softball programs is at least they show they don't care about it. Purdue is sitting here. So first of all, Boo DeOliveira was the former head coach. She coached for several years with no contract. The school didn't even care enough to put her on a year-to-year contract or a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal. When her initial contract expired, they kept her without a contract. So she was basically just a normal employee. That right there is a problem in today's college athletics world. So let's start there. Then you go in and you fire Boo DeOliveira for whatever reason. She had good recruiting classes, didn't have a lot of wins, didn't have a great record. So, okay, I get it. So you fire her because you don't like the results. Got it. That's allowed. This is college athletics. Winning's the job. You don't win. Okay. Stop there. Period. So now the idea, if you fire a coach for not winning, then the idea, I would think, and maybe I'm wrong, but the idea would be to hire a coach with the purpose of winning, especially when you had the recruiting classes that were such highly rated as Boo DeOliveira had. So if you're going to hire a coach that and your goal is winning, you know what? Hire a search firm. That's great. You have somebody who can reach out even to coaches who are still in the postseason. You can do all the backdoor things to get yourself in line for the best coaching candidates. The thing to not do, I feel like, in that situation is to have that search firm call sitting SEC head coaches and to give them a list of coaches' names that even the search firm turns up their nose at, that there's no way you're going to get these coaches. Maybe that's a little bit of a mistake for a Big Ten program. But also maybe it's a veil. Maybe it's, oh, well, you know what? We tried. And so we're going to settle for the second assistant who has 5 years of coaching experience at Division I, has been at Purdue for 2 years, is part of the lack of winning over the last 2 years. And again, it's nothing against her as a person. It's not even anything against her as a coach. But when you're part of a staff that's not winning to the point that you want to fire the head coach and the first assistant who's the hitting coach, it kind of stands to reason that maybe keeping the assistant who was the second assistant in charge of the defense might not be the smartest move.
But let me ask you, I'll play this. I mean, could it be too now that maybe instead of focusing on the coach and why they haven't succeeded there, maybe it goes above the coach's name? That's the problem. That maybe, it doesn't matter who you hire as a head coach, until things above change, doesn't matter who you put as a head coach there. It could be whatever. And so maybe, that's part of the issue at Purdue is the issues go really deep. And maybe, Justin, the people they did target turned them down because they hurt. Like, where's the support? Why are we? There's no way we can succeed here, right? I think this is, I feel bad for Frizzoni, because what is she supposed to do? Turn down the job? She's a second assistant. Right. What are you going to say? It's a big opportunity for her. And look, maybe the players currently in that roster like her, right? You meant there's some talent there. I saw him in person. There's some nice young talent. You mentioned from the recruiting classes there. Maybe she's the right fit there. Who knows? But it's just kind of wild. Why would you do a coaching search if you end up with your assistant? It's just counterproductive. And I'm just that to me that's the disappointing thing from a Purdue standpoint is you just had Indiana get to a regional final with Sean Estan and their personnel, right? And I thought, hey, Purdue's open. This is a reaction to Indiana, the old rivalry. They're trying to raise the level. And by the way, they have history there. Carol Bruggerman was a head coach at Purdue at one point. It's not like they haven't had some tradition there. But yeah, that was a head scratcher. I remember when that news came out, Purdue announced it Friday. There were a lot of coaches kind of scratching their heads like, what? Like, what happened here?
Well, there was coaches scratching their heads and saying more than just what happened. I mean, that's the thing. It boggles the mind. And clearly, to your point, there is an issue above the softball coaching staff at Purdue because something does not stand to reason. You go into a coaching search, you fire a head coach early in the summer, you hire a search firm. All that shows, in theory, you care. It shows you care. Then after a month, you go and hire your existing assistant. After a month, it doesn't make any sense. If your initial pool of candidates all said no, if your list all said no, if the calls you made didn't get returned, hire the assistant, get started, roll with what you got, and be done with it. It should not take a month. The fact that it took a month says Purdue settled. They settled for the second assistant, who they kept around clearly as somebody that they liked and felt was a good backup plan. She's the head coach now. But the problem is she is set up to fail through no fault of her own because you've got an athletic department that clearly could not give a flying crap. They may not even give a crap on the ground at this point. Then you also have a set of support, whether it's around the athletic department for the program or whatever, that are apparently okay with the way the Purdue athletic department ran this search. And that's a problem in and of itself. And how would you like to be Frizzoti now? You're the head coach of a Big Ten program. Everyone is looking at you like there's a problem through no fault of your own, because you're right. You take a job that's offered you. Why would you not?
Power 5 job, yeah.
But how would you like to be in her shoes now? Because number one, you're walking into this job, and every time you walk in somewhere, people are going to look at you and wonder how you got in the letters that are on your backpack and on your shirt. But second, you've got to hire a staff. You've got to lead a program. And let's be honest, you've got to be taken seriously in head coaches meetings, none of which are givens with the way the Purdue athletic department has set her up right now.
So how do you really feel about the move?
I told you there's things I can't say on a podcast.
I will say this. I'm not shocked this happened with a Big Ten school. I've said this. I've argued with Nate Rohrer. Big Ten conference, a lot of the schools, it's about football, volleyball, before, there's a list of things before softball. I think that's also part of the issue. But we spent enough time on Purdue.
Well, one thing I want to say is that at a time when Big Ten softball should be at its highest because of the Jordy Ball thing, here comes Purdue bringing the entire conference back down.
I am so fascinated. We'll get more into this maybe next week, because we're going to – obviously next week, as we'll get into at the end of this interview, is a big, big week in college athletics for many reasons, with realignment and everything. But one of the topics we'll hit up is the Big Ten TV media rates and how softball will be impacted there. Remember, they will be not on ESPN next year. Will softball get exposure on the Big Ten? Obviously, they're going to be on the Big Ten network, but what about it anywhere else? So we'll get into that more though later. We could spend that's a whole other hot topic there. So those are the head coaching moves there.
Yep.
Now let's get into the assistants. How would you describe the theme of the assistant coach market right now, currently, and as we head towards that July 1st date when it becomes official that schools can start paying that full-time assistant, whether it's fourth paid full-time coach?
So I have referred to this and will continue to refer to this as the summer of pitching coaches. The number of pitching coaches at Power 5 programs and at what I consider top shelf mid-major programs the number of pitching coaches at those programs that have changed hands, or the number of pitching coaches that have come and gone, and those roles that have changed hands just in the early part of the summer, it is insane. It's wacky. As it stands right now, and again, this is Tuesday night, we've got roughly 11 major program that if I said this program, this program, this program, even your casual softball fan would go, oh. 11 where the pitching coach job has changed hands so far this summer. And there's more than half of those that are still open as we speak. And at big time programs, big time roles with big time pitching staffs at big time programs.
Well, and that is going to be, I could tell you that's going to be one of the more fascinating things this offseason is how teams will fill their pitching coach jobs. Because I think we're going to find out there's more jobs open than pitching coaches.
Yeah.
For many reasons. For whatever, a lot of young pitchers are not getting into coaching, finance, whatever you want to talk about. I mean, I know for a fact there are going to be, and this is probably going to continue. There's going to be head coaches that are going to get offered assistant jobs because they have a pitching background. I would not be surprised, Justin, not just for pitching coaches. I think because of the third full-time assistant, you're going to see some hires of like, wait, what? Of people that maybe are not even currently a coach, that maybe they are working a regular job, maybe they're doing whatever. Maybe, but because they played, hey, can you come back, try it out, blah, 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 right? I think we're going to see some interesting, fascinating kind of like, I think a little bit of everything hire. I don't think we're going to see – I think a lot of people are assuming, well, they're just going to promote the volunteer. And I don't believe so. And I think you're going to see some outside-the-box hires as this offseason plays out, especially with the third full-time assistant. Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. I think, I'm still going back to my use of the word wacky. I'm sticking to that for this offseason. It's been a wacky offseason. I think it's going to stay a wacky offseason. You add the fourth paid coach and what it brings with it, it's going to make some things even wackier. But I think one of the points you made, I don't want people to look at it and miss it, is that, there are people who probably are not even in the game right now in terms of in college coaching that are going to get significant looks for college coaching jobs just because there's a need for pitching coaches. And there's not enough to go around. There's just not enough to go around. And one thing too, though, I think you're honestly going to see a lot of coaches who are in over their heads or who maybe aren't ready for big jobs, get big jobs just because they seem like they know what they're talking about. Do they need time to grow and blossom? Yes. But right now is when they're needed. Right now is when the jobs are opening. And so I think you're going to see that too.
I think you're going to see too some marquee programs make a panic move because they just assume, hey, we're blank and blank. So this head coach at this school is automatically going to come here, right? Or this, and then they get turned down and like, what? Wait, but no, what are you talking? And now you're scrambling to figure it out. And I think you could see some of that. I'm really intrigued by that as that itself plays itself out. Let's talk about the moves that have happened in the assistants. Let me start. I'm going to start with this one, and then you can kind of make your pick. As far as so far, to me, my favorite move of this coaching carousel, assistant or head coach, is Victoria Hayward to Washington, with Courtney Gano moving up from director of ops to the assistant position. Washington's pretty much not wasted time. They've hired their full-time assistant. All the assistants have been announced. I think part of that is Heather Tarr's with the U.S. national team. They're getting ready to play in Ireland, so that doesn't surprise me. But I love this move. I like Gano, but I'm going to just focus on Hayward for a moment because you and I cover the Los Angeles regional. Shout out to Vinny at UCLA SID. Props to you, buddy. Just for giving us understanding there's technology in today's 2023, and people can cover your regionals from remote, like me and Justin decided to do 1, 2 in the morning. Yeah. And we talked to Stacey Newman, who glowingly talked about Victoria Hayward and the impact she made on that program and the impact that she made on Stacey. Helping the San Diego State success, 2 NCAA tournament appearances, Mountain West regular championship automatic bid 2 years in a row. Tremendous. She's playing at Athletes Unlimited. I got to know her when she was a director of ops at UCF. She is as organized as any person I've ever met. She is as responsible as anybody. She left San Diego State for Washington because it was her dream job. It was her alma mater in Washington. I'm not suggesting Heather Tarr's retiring anytime soon because I think further than that. I think I would be surprised if she's not the head coach. I think she'll coach at Washington at least until the Olympics, and that's 5 years away. But whenever that comes, I think Victoria Hayward could be groomed to being the heir apparent at Washington. I think she's that good. I think if she wants to be a head coach, I think she'll be successful. And I think Washington, that would make sense if Heather grooms her to be the head coach. Not suggesting that's going to happen. I haven't talked to anybody that. It's just my own outside there. But I also love the fact, even if that doesn't happen, Justin, no disrespect to the staff that Heather just had that got to the World Series. But I actually think Hayward and Gatto is an upgrade into the staff on what they had, personally, with the experience, the tradition they have, the ties. I think they're a better staff. I think they're a stronger staff. And I think I really love what's happened there at Washington. Thoughts?
No, I think that's a good pull, honestly, because, again, with respect to Courtney Gano, Victoria Hayward, I think is where it's at here, because I think because Hayward has her thumb in so many pies, people see her as the captain of Team Canada in the Olympics. They see her as the first player signed to Athletes Unlimited. They see her as an Athletes Unlimited player, even when she's off the executive committee or whatever they call it. I think a lot of people miss the impact that Hayward had on that San Diego State team. Because you have to think that's a team that, even though their pitching was solid, that went toe-to-toe with Utah in the Super Regional. That's a team that won the regional. That's a team that won the Mountain West, and in the tournament, and won the Mountain West regular season last year. I think people miss the impact that Hayward had on that San Diego State offense and on that San Diego State program, because so many people see her in different roles, and she's got so many of them. But the impact that she had on San Diego State is, you have to underscore it. You cannot understate it. And to your point, I really like the move for Washington because, yes, they got to the Women's College World Series this year. I'm not sure what leprechaun they ran into to get there. But the thing is now, I think with Hayward in the fold as the hitting coach, or in whatever her role is going to be defined as an assistant, I think Washington can and will earn their way back to the Women's College World Series. I think she, to your point, is that big of a difference maker potentially for the Husky offense, for the Huskies in general. She's played there. She brings a passion for the program. We've talked about that with other jobs earlier. Like, it's one of those things where she is she's a difference maker. And two, clearly Heather Tarr trusts her to bring her in. She clearly trusts her from having been in her own program, knowing what she's made of. And I think that's a difference maker too, because as you mentioned, Tarr's with Team USA. Granted, Hayward's playing Athletes Unlimited, so it's not like Hayward is there while Tarr is not. But that does make a difference because Tarr has to be trusting of the staff she's assembled just in general to do things. You know, there might be times where she has to rely on calls to be made or something simple like that, and phone calls to be made, and she clearly trusts Hayward. I think that one's a home run. To your point, I think that's a great
love it. Just love it, man. When I saw that, I'm like, wow, that makes a ton of sense. Like, and no disrespect to the previous staff, but man, to me, like, I know you do these articles from time to time, the hot list, right? The hot name. Mm-hmm. I just think that she would be on that list, except I don't think she's moving anywhere. I think generally she's there for the long term at Washington. Who knows what her playing status will be moving forward down the road, but I do. I like that move a ton. What's your favorite move of this offseason so far?
I do like Hayward, to your point. I kind of like Josh Bloomer going to Arizona. Arizona's offense did not really suffer this year. They hit well. They've obviously got some star players. But, in a flurry of moves that Arizona made, I really like the hiring of Bloomer for two reasons. One, he's been an SEC hitting coach. He's been an ACC hitting coach. He's been, he did well with the Duke offense, rebuilt that, or honestly built, goes to South Carolina. Offense is better in 1 year. I mean, Bloomer he's proven that he's a really solid hitting coach. You send him out to Arizona, obviously a program that didn't like missing the tournament this year. But now they want to start a new streak. You've got an offense that was already doing well. Well, now you have a hitting coach there that can be that is already proven to be able to take offenses the next step up. I think also it adds a different dynamic in the sense of Bloomer is a coach whose ties are mainly in the East. He was a high school coach in Kentucky. He has coached at Duke and South Carolina in college. So you're talking about, sure, recruiting ties don't just stay regional at that level, but that's somebody whose deepest recruiting ties are in the East or in that, those different markets where he's been concentrated for his career to this point. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. Obviously, you bring in a male, which is something that Arizona's not had as an assistant since Larry Ray under Mike Candrea back.
Ooh, that's a good name there, Larry Ray.
How many years ago? So I just think it changes up the dynamic some, and I think it just takes the Arizona offense to a new level.
Well, and I think what it does, it's what it tells me, is that Caitlin Lowe kind of wants to be more of the game manager type and probably felt that being the hitting coach and the head coach was too much, right? And look, let's be real. Arizona didn't miss the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1986. So obviously a lot of scrutiny that comes with that. I think she looked into it, decided to make some moves. And I think one of them being letting go, to some extent, the responsibilities of running the offense. I mean, I'm sure she will still have her fingerprints on it. You don't bring a Josh Bloomer in to just sit there and write a lineup card. He's going to be influenced, on the offensive side. And then they obviously brought in Kristen Conrad to be the pitching coach from Loyola Marymount. Interesting staff there for Arizona. It's worth noting, I believe Bloomer's the third assistant. Now, for many years, Justin, we were always trying to figure out who's the number one assistant, who's the number two. Now we got to figure out who's the number three assistant in a lot of these staffs. We'll see what happens there with Arizona and their moves. Other moves of note, I like Kirsten Verdon. Staying in the Big Ten, but going to Illinois, coming over from Wisconsin. I thought she did a good job with pitchers at Wisconsin. Now she comes to Illinois. When Illinois gets good pitching, they usually win and make the tournament. I think she'll do a good job developing pitchers there at Illinois. I like that move by Tyra Perry. Helps that it's a coach that knows the league. Interesting to see how Yvette Healy replaces Verdon on that staff. That staff's was together for a long time, Justin. And that's what it's going to be. What's so fascinating. You have Wisconsin open. Mike Bosch was at Florida for a while since Jen Rocha left for Oklahoma. So that job is open for the first time in a while. Since 2018? 18. I was there for Jen Rocha's last game at Florida when they got eliminated by Oklahoma and Tim Walton was ejected. Maybe? Yeah, I think he was ejected. I don't remember. I don't know. It's a blur.
I was there.
I remember you had an interesting question for Coach Walton about his future.
Oh, God.
Freshman that made headlines. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, so my Florida looking pitching coach, Oklahoma State, John Barfeld, retiring from Oklahoma State. I mean, these are big-time jobs here, Justin. Oklahoma, programs that aspire for the College World Series, in particular in Florida and Oklahoma State.
Absolutely. And like I say, the summer of the pitching coaches, and those are probably the two biggest ones on the job, on the docket right now, Florida and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's been to 4 straight World Series. They went to the World Series in 19, brought Barfeld in 20, or in that summer of 19 for 2020, and then have been to the World Series in 3 years with him as their pitching coach. Florida, obviously we know Florida, it's Tim Walton's Gators. Those are 2 huge gigs because those are programs, especially Oklahoma State's not going anywhere, but Florida is reloading with a star-studded freshman class. And both of those programs are national contenders. They're programs with a lot of promise. And now you need pitching coaches. And what's funny is Florida's incoming recruits are both, or their 2 biggest recruits are both pitchers. The National Gatorade Player of the Year is a pitcher.
Well, and the thing that I found fascinating about Florida is they announced the departure of Mike Bosch 30 minutes before Game 2 of the National Championship Series with a press release, Justin, which is unheard of in softball. I mean, my goodness, you know this as well as anybody. You got to dig in to find out who left. And, it's like a mystery. Like, what? This about what happened? But Florida, literally wrote an official press release with quotes from Tim Walton, Mike Bosch, that Mike Bosch was out. He was done. You don't see that. Clearly, that was calculated by Tim and Florida. They wanted it out there that job is open. They're big fish hunting, quote, to use a phrase there, right? He's not settling.
No, they're big fish hunting. He's not selling, but I will give Florida credit for doing that because I mean, a big part of the reason you don't see a lot of programs do press releases on coaches leaving is a lot of or being let go or mutual departure, whatever the phrasing is. It can be awkward. It can be incredibly awkward. It can start rumors. It can do whatever. I give Florida credit for facing it head on and just saying, hey, we're parting ways. You quote Tim Walton, you quote Mike Bosch, you give everybody a chance to have a clean slate. There's no, one line quote, we wish them the best in the future kind of thing. Like it was an in-depth, here's why we made the move. From Walton, from Bosch, it was, the last 5 years have been, whatever, like an actual quote where it's clear there's not a bridge burning party going on here. So I actually have to give Florida respect for doing that. And doing it the way they did it. Being in the press box of the World Series when it came out, I would have liked a little different timing, but that's okay.
Maybe that was part of the plan is by doing it then, you can't break it.
I will take a press release over something like that at bad timing over no press release at all, to be fair. But at the same time, yes, Florida's big game hunting. I think Tim Walton probably went into it with a short list of coaches that he was interested in coming to coach the pitchers, most of whom, if not all of whom, I think he either can get or is fairly certain he can get, no matter their current stature and current roles. And I think he will get one of them. I mean, this Florida pitching coach job is not a bad gig. Like I say, the two main recruits in the incoming class of 2023, I guess, that'll start playing with the 2024 season are both pitchers. They're both highly touted pitchers. I don't think it's an accident, the timing of all this.
And I think it's smart that he leaked a press release did. Clearly because now everybody knows that job's open, right? Including pitching coaches that currently are employed, right? There is no guessing game like, hey, did I hear Florida? Is that true that Florida's open? Is it really? Is that
right?
No, it's everybody know. Right. I think it's actually super smart. Like, it's smart. Like, go make sure people know so you can get the best candidates there. Hell, Justin's going to break it anyway if you try to keep it a secret too long. That's been proven. I always love that, too, when I get messages mad at you. Because, hey, where did this guy find out he broke the story? I'm like, I don't know, man. He talks to people. Don't yell at me. But then they get mad. Like, you could have leaked it yourself and he wouldn't have to break it. Anyway. Every time. I know you break a story every time I get a text message from somebody. They send me a link of you're breaking the story. How did he find out? I don't know. I'm just trying to, I got a life. I don't know.
You're blowing my head up here. I'm going to be lucky to fit.
Oh, you and Woj, man. It's you and Woj. I told everybody. The two most important Twitter followers right now is Woj and you. Because you both are taking turns breaking news. I mean, if you're into college baseball, Kendall Rogers, fine, whatever. But no, seriously. Basketball and the NBA and softball is all I care about. And that's the two sources there. A couple quick notes before we sign off. Because you're checking your phone. Just like Woj would. As always. Josh Johnson to Virginia Tech coming over from Mississippi State.
Yep.
Courtney Oliver now at Wichita State. Coming over from Houston. Obviously was the head coach at East Carolina. She knows the American pretty well. Those who have to get to know some new members there. Your thoughts on those two assistant moves of note that I think are interesting. Obviously, Virginia Tech, that's been open for a little while there with Pete DeMore, but he lands Josh Johnson.
No, I mean, Josh Johnson's brilliant. He's got a great mind. He's an innovator when it comes to pitching. Obviously, Mississippi State's Mississippi State. He did well with some pitchers there, turned a couple of them into professional prospects. But he brings a unique approach to the pitching coach role. So so from Virginia Tech's perspective, as long as and I think it's a good position for him to be given the space to do what he does. A little unconventional sometimes, sure, but I think it's a hire that has a high reward potential. And then Wichita State, like you mentioned, Courtney Oliver she's been around the American. Granted, there's some new teams to learn, but she knows the schools in this conference, at least the ones that are staying in this conference. And I don't think that's underrated. And I think too, it gives Wichita State, like you think about it, that's a pitching staff at Wichita that was not bad in 2023. It was actually a really solid staff, something like a 2.5 ERA. So a couple of youngsters that did really well. Presley Bell was the pitching coach there, kind of fell into the role 2 years ago, really did well in it. especially considering how she got originally came into the job. I was really impressed with her. And now Oliver steps into it, and she's a veteran pitching coach. She's been around for a while, and she steps into it's not even a rebuild. It's just a continuation and make him even better role for Courtney Oliver. That's an ideal spot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and they returned some of that young pitching too. There'll be more experience there than there was going into the season. I know everybody's going to focus on losing Sydney McKinney, and rightfully so, the greatest player in Shocker softball history. They lose a good senior class, but they do have good talent coming back. Probably will go in as the favorites in the American. You can make the case it's either them or Charlotte, which sounds weird. We'll get used to this.
Will we, though? Will we get used to it?
I hope you do, because I'll look at your forecast to make sure. Hey, wait, that school moved. Anyway, we'll find out, and who knows what moves are ahead. All right, we know there's a lot of other moves that have happened, but folks, we've spent a lot of time now. Justin's getting ready to go to Colorado to break more stories. There'll be more moves coming. We'll probably try to get Justin back next week at some point when we're going to do a special, because next week the transfer portal closes. July 1st comes around, which also means schools could start paying full-time assistants to 3 coaches. So you might see a lot of announcements there. Plus, oh, by the way, that's for schools like San Diego State. If you want to leave, you might want to let people know before that date and pay your money, notify people, and not do it the way you did it this past week. So who knows, Justin, what's ahead? Because remember, a year ago at this time, UCLA and USC sprung at surprising everybody like, oh, by the way, we're leaving the Pac-12, going to the Big Ten. So lots coming, Justin. So you're a lot for you to keep up. Where can they keep up with you?
Well, articles and contents published on extrainningsoftball.com. My Twitter feed really does not slow down right now. That's at Just Facts Ma'am on Twitter. Or just search my name. Those are the best places. I'm on different social medias, but
if you sat at a table at lunch with Woj, Adam Schefter, Kendall Rogers, first of all, would you guys even eat, or would you just be staring at your phones throughout the darn deal? I don't even know what kind of questions would you even ask.
I mean, I think we all know the answer to that. None of us would have time for conversation with one another. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not on a level with Schefter and Woj, but I mean, I'll take the seat at the table if they want to go college softball. I will.
Listen, man, I swear, I'm going to say this again because people text me this. I don't know where he gets it from. I'll literally be calling him and ask him about something, and then he's like, "Hey, can I call you back?" Oh boy, and next thing you know, he disappears. The next thing I know, he's breaking stories and. And then I call him back like, what happened? So. Anyway, sir, have a safe trip.
Thanks,
we will be talking very soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate you.